My name is Genevieve Dubois. Tonight was supposed to be the proudest night of my life. My son Marcus was getting engaged to a girl from what he called a prestigious family. I walked into the ballroom of the Obsidian Hotel, a property I acquired 3 years ago for $40 million, ready to toast to their future. Instead, my future daughter-in-law's mother threw a stained apron at my face. "You are late," she hissed, pointing a manicured finger at the service doors. "The kitchen is that way, and do not let me catch you eating the hors d'oeuvres." I stood there stunned. Not because of the insult, but because she had absolutely no idea she was speaking to the owner of the building. I looked down at the cheap cotton apron in my hand. Then I looked at my son across the room. He saw me. He saw his mother being treated like hired help. And he looked away. That was the moment my heart broke, but my resolve hardened into diamond. I did not throw the apron back. I did not call security. I put the apron on. Because I knew the only way to find out who these people really were and why my son was so afraid of them was to serve them. And serve them I would. A cold dish of justice they would never forget. Before I tell you how I dismantled their entire fake empire in less than 2 hours without spilling a drop of my wine, please like and subscribe. It really helps share these stories of standing up for your worth when people try to tear you down. Let us go back to 7 p.m. this evening. The air in Chicago was biting cold, the kind of wind that cuts right through your coat. I stepped out of my town car in front of the Obsidian. The valet, Thomas, rushed to open my door, his face lighting up. "Good evening, Ms. Dubois," he beamed, reaching for my hand. I pressed a finger to my lips, giving him a conspiratorial wink. "Shh, Thomas. Tonight, I am just a mother. I am not the CEO tonight." He nodded, understanding the drill immediately. I wanted this night to be about Marcus. I wanted to meet the Vance family on equal footing, as a parent, not as a business transaction. I did not want them to like me for my bank account. I wanted to see if they would respect me for me. I was wearing a simple black silk suit from the row. To the untrained eye, it was plain, austere even. There were no logos, no flashy gold buttons, no screaming patterns. But to those who know, the fabric moved like water, and the tailoring was impeccable. It cost more than the mid-sized sedan parked near the entrance. I checked my reflection in the glass doors. At 52, I had fought tooth and nail to get here. I grew up in the projects of the South Side, where dreams usually died before they were old enough to walk. I scrubbed floors, I waited tables, and I saved every penny until I bought my first motel. Now I stood in the lobby of my crown jewel. The marble floors gleamed under the chandeliers I had personally selected from Italy. Everything was perfect. Or so I thought. I was about 10 minutes late. A board meeting had run over and traffic on the loop was a nightmare. As I hurried toward the ballroom entrance, checking my watch, a heavy hand grabbed my shoulder. It was not a friendly tap. It was a shove, possessive and disrespectful. I spun around, my instincts from the old neighborhood flaring up. A tall, flushed white man in an ill-fitting tuxedo stood there. He smelled of expensive cologne, trying to cover the scent of cheap whiskey. I recognized him immediately from the background checks I run on anyone entering my inner circle. This was Brad Sterling, Clarissa Vance's brother-in-law, the so-called CFO of Vance Holdings. He looked me up and down with a sneer that made my skin crawl. It was a look I had seen 1,000 times before, the look of a mediocre man who assumes his mere existence places him above a woman like me. Finally, he barked, "You agency people are useless. We pay for premium service, and you show up on colored people time." The words hung in the air between us. Gross, ugly, dated. My blood began to boil, a slow, hot rage rising from my stomach. He did not wait for me to respond. He shoved a heavy silver tray into my chest. It was sticky with spilled champagne and piled high with empty lipstick-stained glasses. "Take this to the scullery and bring out more Bollinger for table 4. And try to smile. You look like you are at a funeral." I stood frozen. The audacity was breathtaking. I opened my mouth to tell him that I could buy his entire existence with the vintage Cartier watch on my wrist. I was about to snap my fingers and have security throw him out into the snow where he belonged. How dare he? I am Genevieve Dubois. I employ 3,000 people. I was featured on the cover of Forbes last month. But then over his shoulder, through the open doors of the ballroom, I saw Marcus. My boy. He was standing next to a girl in a silver sequined dress that caught the light a little too aggressively. That must be Tiffany. Marcus looked terrified. He was sweating, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He did not look like a man in love. He looked like a hostage. Clarissa Vance, a woman I had only seen in photos, was whispering something in his ear, her hand gripping his arm tight enough to leave a bruise. Marcus flinched. If I caused a scene now, if I pulled rank and revealed myself, the walls would go up. They would put on their masks, they would charm me, and I would never know why my son looked so afraid. I needed to see what was happening from the inside. I needed to be invisible. In America, there is no one more invisible than a middle-aged black woman holding a tray. I looked at Brad, then at the dirty tray in my hands. The champagne was seeping onto the sleeve of my $5,000 jacket. I took a deep breath, swallowing my pride. It tasted bitter like bile. But I forced it down. I lowered my head, hiding the fire in my eyes. "Yes, sir," I said, my voice steady, masking the power that rumbled underneath. "I will take care of it immediately." "Good," Brad grunted, turning his back on me without another thought. "Now move it." I watched him walk away, strutting like a rooster who thinks he owns the farm. I gripped the cold silver handles of the tray until my knuckles turned ash gray. I was not a server tonight. I was a spy. And the Vances had just let the wolf right into the sheep pen. I turned and walked toward the kitchen doors, passing my own employees, who were too busy to notice the woman in the black suit was their boss. As I pushed through the swinging doors, the noise of the kitchen hit me. Clattering pans, shouting chefs, the hiss of steam. It was familiar. It was where I started. I found a stack of clean aprons near the dish pit. I took one. It was white, starched, and stiff. I wrapped it around my waist, covering the fine silk of my suit. I tied the knot tight. It felt like putting on armor. I checked my phone one last time before slipping it into my pocket. I sent a single text message to my personal assistant, who was likely enjoying her evening off. The text read, "Get me the full financial audit on Vance Holdings, tonight." Then I picked up a fresh tray of champagne. I took a deep breath, composing my face into a mask of servitude. I was ready. I walked back out onto the floor, my eyes scanning the room. I made my way toward table 4, where Brad had returned to his seat next to Clarissa. They were laughing loud and raucous, clinking their glasses. Finally, someone competent. Brad sneered as I approached, snatching a glass from my tray without looking at me. Clarissa glanced at me, her eyes narrowing. She was a beautiful woman in a superficial way, but her face was hard-etched with the stress of maintaining a lie. She looked at my shoes. My simple, comfortable black leather loafers. "At least your shoes are sensible," she muttered, taking a sip of wine. "My daughter needs her glass refilled. She is over there with her fiancé. Go." She almost slipped up. She almost said something else. I caught it. I nodded and moved toward Marcus and Tiffany. My heart was pounding against my ribs. This was the test. Would my son acknowledge me? Would he introduce me, or would he pretend I was just another shadow in the room? I approached them from behind. Tiffany was laughing, a high-pitched sound that grated on my ears. She was holding court, showing off her ring to a group of friends. "It is 3 carats, she bragged, twisting her hand under the light. Marcus did good. Although I had to give him a little push on the clarity. Marcus stood beside her, holding a glass of sparkling water. He looked miserable. "Champagne, miss?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Tiffany spun around, her face lit with annoyance at the interruption. "Oh, finally. I have been waiting for 10 minutes. She grabbed a glass. Then she paused. She looked at me. Really looked at me. Her eyes widened slightly, not with recognition, but with disgust. "Ugh," she groaned, turning back to her friends. "Why do they always hire such old staff? It ruins the vibe." I felt a sting, sharp and hot. But I ignored her. I looked at Marcus. He was staring at the floor. "Sir," I said, extending the tray toward him. Marcus looked up. His eyes met mine. For a second time stopped. I saw the shock register on his face. His mouth opened slightly. Mom, he mouthed, no sound coming out. I waited. I waited for him to hug me. I waited for him to say, Tiffany, this is my mother. But then Tiffany snapped her fingers in front of his face. Marcus, wake up. Daddy is waving at us. Marcus flinched. He looked at Tiffany, then back at me. I saw the fear in his eyes. I saw the hesitation. And then I saw the betrayal. He looked down at the tray. No thank you, he mumbled, turning his back to me. He turned his back on his own mother. I stood there, the tray trembling slightly in my hands. The rejection was physical. It felt like a punch to the gut. My own son, the boy I had raised, the boy I had built this empire for, was ashamed of me. Or worse, he was too weak to claim me. Tiffany laughed again, oblivious. Go on, shoo. She waved her hand at me without looking. We are busy. I lowered the tray. A cold calm washed over me. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a clarity so sharp it could cut glass. They wanted a servant, fine. I would give them the best service of their lives. I would serve them every course of their own destruction. I retreated to the shadows near the wall, blending in with the curtains. I watched as Brad pulled Marcus aside. I watched as Clarissa whispered to a wealthy-looking couple pointing at the centerpieces I had paid for. I was invisible to them, and that made me dangerous. I needed to get closer. I needed to hear what they were saying when they thought no one of consequence was listening. I saw Brad leave the table and head toward the service hallway, pulling his phone out. He looked nervous. I checked my surroundings. The coast was clear. I adjusted my apron and followed him. He ducked into a small alcove near the kitchen entrance, checking over his shoulder. He did not see the middle-aged waitress wiping down a table nearby. I moved closer, polishing the same spot on the table over and over, straining my ears. Yeah, I know, Brad hissed into the phone. The funds are coming. The kid is going to sign the prenup tonight. No, he is an idiot. He does not suspect a thing. Once he signs, we can access the trust. Just stall the investors for 24 more hours. I froze. A prenup that grants access to a trust. That was not a prenup. That was theft. Marcus did not have a trust fund from them. He had the accounts I had set up for him. They were trying to drain him dry. I smiled. It was a terrifying smile even to myself. So that was the game. They were broke. They were desperate. And they thought my son was their golden ticket. I finished wiping the table and walked back into the kitchen. I untied the apron and tossed it into the bin. No, I needed it. I picked it back up. I would play this role a little longer. I would let them dig their grave a few feet deeper. I walked over to the head chef, Henri. He was screaming at a sous chef about the temperature of the soup. When he saw me, he froze. His face went pale. Madame Dubois, he stammered, wiping his hands on his jacket. I did not know you were... Why are you wearing that, Henri? I said, my voice low and dangerous. Listen to me carefully. The table 4. The Vance family. Yes, madame, I want you to delay their main course. Tell them there is a problem in the kitchen. Make them wait. And bring me a bottle of the 1996 Dom Perignon. But madame, that is for the VIPs. I looked at him. One look. Right away, madam, he squeaked. I took the bottle he handed me. I did not open it. Not yet. I walked back out to the floor, positioning myself right behind Clarissa's chair. She was complaining about the delay. This service is abominable, she loudly declared. When Marcus takes over his inheritance, we are going to have to teach him how to hire better help. I stepped forward, refilling her water glass. I apologize for the delay, ma'am, I said, my voice smooth as silk. The chef wants everything to be perfect for such a distinguished family. Clarissa preened, fluffing her hair. Well, at least someone recognizes class when they see it. She had no idea. She was looking at the executioner, and she just handed me the axe. Just then my phone vibrated in my pocket. I slipped it out under the serving tray. It was the email from my assistant. The subject line read, Vance Holdings, urgent. I opened the attachment, and there it was, in black and white. Bankruptcy filings, 3 lawsuits for fraud, and a foreclosure notice on their estate in the Hamptons. I almost laughed out loud. They were not just broke, they were destitute, and they were using my son's engagement party paid for by me to secure their lifeline. I looked up. Brad was walking back to the table looking sweaty but relieved. He sat down and slapped Marcus on the back. Ready for the big night, son? Brad asked, grinning like a shark. Marcus nodded weakly. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. The game was set. The players were in position, and I held all the cards. It was time to serve the appetizers, and the first course would be a little slice of reality. I walked toward the DJ booth. It was time to change the music. I tightened my grip on the silver tray until the metal bit into my palms as I navigated through the sea of guests. Walking into the ballroom felt like stepping onto a battlefield disguised as a paradise. The air smelled of expensive lilies and betrayal. I dodged waiters who had no idea they were bypassing the woman who signed their paychecks. My eyes were locked on one target, Table 4, the center of the universe for tonight. The Vances sat there like royalty on a budget, loud and taking up too much space, and there, sitting between Clarissa and Tiffany, was my son, Marcus. He looked handsome in his tuxedo. I paid for that tuxedo. I remembered fitting him for his first suit when he was 10 for church. He had stood so tall then, so proud to be my protector. Now he sat slumped, laughing nervously at whatever joke Brad had just cracked. I moved closer. 10 feet, 5 feet. I stepped into the light of the crystal chandelier directly above their table. Champagne, I asked. My voice was calm, but inside I was screaming. Marcus looked up. The glass of water in his hand shook slightly. His eyes met mine. I saw the recognition hit him like a physical blow. His pupils dilated. His mouth opened slightly. Mom, the word formed on his lips, silent and terrified. I waited. I stood there offering him a lifeline. All he had to do was stand up. All he had to do was say, Mother, what are you doing here? Let me get you a seat. But he did not stand. He did not speak. Instead, he swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He looked at Clarissa, then at Tiffany. Fear washed over his face. Pure, unadulterated fear. And then he did the unthinkable. He turned his head away. He reached up and adjusted his bow tie, staring intently at the centerpiece, as if I did not exist, as if I were a ghost. My heart fractured. A clean break down the middle. But before I could even process the pain, a shrill voice cut through the noise. Hey, watch it. It was Tiffany. She jumped up from her chair, knocking the table and causing the silverware to rattle. All eyes at the table turned to her and then to me. You clumsy old hag, she shrieked, pointing at her stilettos. You just spilled champagne all over my Louboutins. Do you know how much these cost? I looked down. The tray in my hand was perfectly level. Not a single drop had spilled. Her shoes were bone dry. She was lying. She was lying simply to assert dominance, to humiliate the help in front of her new family. I did not spill anything, miss. I said, my voice low and steady. The tray is dry. Don't you dare talk back to me, Tiffany yelled, her face twisting into an ugly sneer. I felt a drop. You ruined the suede. Get down here and clean it up. Now! She pointed to the floor, to the dirty carpet beneath the table. She wanted me on my knees. Clarissa chimed in, swirling her wine. You heard her. Apologize and clean it up. God, where do they find these people? Probably fresh off the bus. I ignored them. I ignored the insults. I looked straight at Marcus. This was his second chance, the final chance. Marcus, I said. I did not whisper. I said his name with the authority of the woman who had birthed him, raised him, and paid for every single thing he owned. He flinched at the sound of his name. He looked at me, then at Tiffany's angry face. He looked at Brad, who was watching with amusement. Tell her, Marcus, I said. Tell her I did not spill anything. The table went quiet. They were surprised the servant knew his name. Tiffany glared at him. Marcus, baby. Why is the help talking to you? Tell her to do her job. Marcus looked at me. His eyes were wet. For a second, I saw the boy I loved. But then the coward took over. He looked down at his hands. Just do what she says, please, he whispered. I froze. What did you say? I asked. Just clean the shoe. Marcus snapped, his voice cracking. Just do it so we can get back to dinner. Stop making a scene. The words hung in the air like smoke. He chose them. He chose the lie. He chose to see his mother on her knees rather than stand up to a spoiled brat. Something inside me died in that moment. The soft, nurturing part of Genevieve Dubois that made warm cookies and forgave every mistake turned to stone. The mother was gone. The CEO had entered the building. I looked at Marcus one last time. I memorized his face, the weakness in his jaw, the fear in his eyes. I would remember this. Very well, I said. I slowly lowered myself to one knee. I pulled a white cloth napkin from my pocket. I reached out and wiped the imaginary spot on Tiffany's shoe. See? That wasn't so hard, was it? Tiffany laughed, kicking her foot slightly near my face. Now get out of my sight. You smell like dishwater. I stood up. My knees cracked slightly, but my spine was steel. I looked down at them. They were laughing now, clinking glasses, celebrating their small victory over a powerless servant. Enjoy your evening, I said. I turned and walked away. I did not look back at Marcus. I did not cry. Tears are for people who have hope. I had something better than hope. I had a plan. And as I walked toward the kitchen, listening to their laughter fade behind me, I knew exactly what I had to do. I was going to fire my son. And I was going to foreclose on his future. I lowered my body toward the floor, my knees protesting slightly against the hard surface beneath the plush hotel carpet. The movement felt like it took an eternity, a slow-motion descent into indignity. The sounds of the ballroom seemed to fade away, replaced by the rushing of blood in my ears and the sharp, rhythmic tapping of Tiffany's heel against the leg of the table. She was impatient. She was eager to see me debase myself. I could feel the eyes of the entire table boring into the back of my neck. They were not looking at a person. They were looking at a spectacle, a show of force. As my knee touched the ground, I pulled the white linen napkin from my apron pocket. It was crisp, starched, and bright white, a stark contrast to the dark, humiliating anger swirling in my gut. I reached out for Tiffany's foot. She extended it imperiously like a queen offering her hand to be kissed by a peasant. The shoe was a red-soled Christian Louboutin black patent leather that shone under the crystal chandeliers. I knew the retail price of that shoe because I owned the department store where she likely bought it. Or rather, where Marcus likely bought it for her, using the supplementary credit card I paid off every month. I looked closely at the suede toe box. There was nothing there. Not a drop of champagne, not a speck of dust. It was immaculate. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This was not about cleanliness, this was about power. This was a ritual of dominance designed to establish the hierarchy of her new life. She wanted to show her family and my son that she could make the world bend to her will, and I was the proxy for the world. I began to dab at the invisible stain. I moved the cloth in small circular motions, my head bowed. I could smell the leather of her shoe, the expensive perfume she wore, and the faint metallic scent of the silverware on the table. But mostly, I smelled their arrogance. It was a cloying, suffocating scent that filled my lungs. As I worked, Clarissa Vance leaned forward. I could feel her shadow fall over me. She was not watching the shoe. She was watching my hands. My hands are not soft. They are strong. They have calluses on the palms and scars on the knuckles from years of hard labor. Before I was a CEO, I was a maid. I was a cook. I was a janitor. These hands had scrubbed toilets in bus stations to put food on the table. These hands had carried drywall and mixed cement when I was renovating my first motel because I could not afford contractors. These hands built an empire from the dirt up. But to Clarissa, they were just ugly. "Look at those hands!" Clarissa sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. She took a sip of her wine, speaking loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "They are rough as sandpaper. You can tell a person's entire lineage by the texture of their skin. That is the skin of a mule. Laborer stock." She turned to Marcus, who was staring intently at his water glass, refusing to look at me. "You see, Marcus? This is what I was warning you about." Clarissa continued, gesturing at me with her wineglass, as if I were an exhibit in a museum of failures. "You have to be careful who you associate with. You are entering a new stratum of society now. The Vance family has a reputation to uphold. We do not mix with people who have dirt under their fingernails. It is genetic, really. Some people are born to lead, and some are born to scrub floors. You need to make sure you distance yourself from anyone who drags you down to this level, even if hypothetically that person was someone you used to know." Her words were precise, calculated. She was talking about me. She was talking about his mother. She was telling him to cut me off, to erase his history, to be ashamed of the woman who sacrificed everything so he could sit at that table wearing a tuxedo. I paused in my wiping. My grip on the napkin tightened. I wanted to look up. I wanted to tell her that my rough hands signed checks that would clear her family's entire debt in a heartbeat. I wanted to tell her that the only thing rougher than my hands was the road she was about to go down when I destroyed her credit score. But I stayed still. I kept my head down. I needed to hear it all. I needed to drain the poison from the wound so I could see exactly how deep the infection went. Brad laughed. It was a wet, throaty sound that made my skin crawl. He swirled his whiskey, looking down at me with a smirk that was both amused and predatory. Now, Clarissa, do not be too harsh," Brad said. His voice was smooth, carrying that fake politeness that thinly veils deep-seated prejudice. "It is the natural order of things. Society is like a biological ecosystem. You need the lions like us, and you need the scavengers, the bottom feeders. If we didn't have people like her to take out the trash and wipe our shoes, who would do it? We would have to do it ourselves. And that would be a tragedy." He leaned back, looking satisfied with his philosophical contribution. "Besides," he added, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was still perfectly audible, "it is good for them, gives them purpose. They are happier when they know their place. It is when they try to rise above their station that things get messy." "Right, Marcus." I stopped breathing for a second. The racism was not even subtle. It was casual. It was comfortable. It was the kind of racism that sits in the living room and puts its feet up on the furniture because it feels at home. And my son was sitting right there. My son, a black man, listening to this white man call his people scavengers and bottom feeders. I waited for Marcus to flip the table. I waited for him to punch Brad in the jaw. I waited for him to say anything. Any defense. Any spark of dignity. Marcus laughed. It was a weak, hollow laugh. A nervous chuckle designed to diffuse tension and please his masters. "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice trembling slightly. "I guess so, Brad. Every machine needs gears, right?" Gears. He called us gears. He called me a gear. I finished wiping the clean shoe. I stood up slowly. My knees cracked audibly in the silence that followed Marcus's betrayal. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet space between their cruel jokes. I folded the napkin with precise mechanical movements. I placed it gently on the edge of the table, right next to Tiffany's untouched plate of appetizers. I looked at them. I let my gaze linger on each face, committing every detail to memory. I memorized the way Clarissa's foundation settled into the wrinkles around her sneering mouth. I memorized the broken capillaries in Brad's nose. I memorized the smug, self-satisfied tilt of Tiffany's chin. And I memorized the way Marcus refused to meet my eyes, focusing instead on the condensation dripping down his glass. I was recording them, not just with the phone in my pocket, but with my soul. I was building a dossier of grievances. Every insult was a line item on the invoice I was about to issue. "Is there anything else I can do for you, ma'am?" I asked Tiffany. My voice was devoid of emotion. It was a flat, dead thing. Tiffany looked at her shoe, then at me. She waved her hand dismissively like she was shooing away a fly. No, you missed a spot near the heel, but I do not trust you to touch them again. You probably have germs. Go away, get us another bottle of wine, and make sure it is not corked this time. I bowed my head. A servant's bow. Deep, subservient, mocking if they were smart enough to see it. But they were not smart. They were blinded by their own unearned superiority. As you wish, I said. I turned my back on them. Walking away was harder than kneeling. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around and burn the table down. But I forced my legs to move one in front of the other. I walked past the other guests, who were oblivious to the execution that was being planned in their midst. I felt like a ghost haunting my own hotel. I retreated into the shadows of the service corridor. As the heavy velvet curtains swung shut behind me, blocking out the light of the ballroom, I leaned against the cool plaster of the wall. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of pure cold rage. They thought I was retreating. They thought they had won. They thought they had put the help back in her place. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen glowed in the darkness, illuminating my face. I opened the security app connected to the hotel's camera system. I selected the camera feed for table 4. On the small screen, I watched them. They were toasting. Brad raised his glass high. Clarissa was laughing, patting Marcus on the cheek like a pet. Tiffany was admiring her reflection in a spoon. I watched them celebrate their cruelty. Laugh while you can, I whispered to the empty hallway. I tapped the screen, switching apps to my email. I had a message drafted to the hotel's head of security and the catering manager. I added one more recipient. The legal counsel for Dubois Hospitality. I took a deep breath, smoothing the front of my apron. The humiliation was over. The investigation was complete. Now it was time for the hostile takeover. I pushed off the wall and headed deeper into the darkness of the hotel's back corridors. I was not going to get them wine. I was going to the server room. It was time to cut the lights. It was time to change the atmosphere. Because when the lights go out, the cockroaches scramble. And I wanted to see exactly where they would run. I pushed through the heavy swinging doors, and the hushed elegance of the ballroom vanished instantly. It was replaced by the chaotic symphony of a professional kitchen. The air here was different. It was thick with the scent of searing beef, reducing sauces, and the sharp tang of butane. The noise was a wall of sound. Chefs shouted orders in rapid fire, French and Spanish. Pans clattered against burners, knives chopped against cutting boards with rhythmic precision. This was the heartbeat of the hotel. This was reality. And unlike the fake smiles out there in the dining room, I understood this place. I respected it. As I walked deeper into the stainless steel maze, the staff moved around me like water flowing around a rock. They were too focused on the dinner rush to notice a middle-aged woman in an apron. But then I reached the nerve center where the finished dishes were inspected. Standing there was Henri, my executive chef. He was a mountain of a man with a temper as fiery as his flambe, but he possessed the hands of a surgeon. He was screaming at a sous chef about the placement of a garnish when he looked up and saw me. His eyes went wide. The spoon in his hand froze in midair. He opened his mouth to bellow my title. Madame Chairwoman. I raised a single finger to my lips. The gesture was sharp, immediate. Shh! Henri snapped his mouth shut. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting from my face to the ridiculous apron I was wearing. He understood immediately that this was not a social visit. This was a tactical operation. I stepped up to the pass right next to him. The heat from the heat lamps radiated against my face, a stark contrast to the air-conditioned chill of the ballroom. Henri, I said, my voice low enough that only he could hear over the din of the kitchen. Let me see the ticket for table 4. The Vance party. Henri hesitated for a fraction of a second, his brow furrowing. But he knew better than to question me. He reached over to the ticket rail and pulled down a long white slip of paper. He handed it to me with a nervous hand. I took the receipt. It was long. Absurdly long. I scanned the items listed. My eyes narrowed as I read. Beluga caviar service for 6. 2 bottles of Chateau Margaux. A whole roasted Dover sole. Japanese A5 Wagyu ribeye, the most expensive cut we carried, prepared medium well, which was a crime against cuisine in itself. They were ordering like kings. They were eating like they owned the place. I looked at the bottom of the ticket. The total was already over $12,000. And they had not even ordered dessert yet. But it was not the total that made my blood run cold. It was the name on the billing line. Room charge. Suite 401. Guest name. Marcus Dubois. I stared at the name, my son's name. They were not just humiliating me. They were not just using my son to pay their debts. They were feasting on his flesh. They were gorging themselves on the money I had worked my fingers to the bone to provide for him. Every bite of steak, every sip of wine was being paid for by the mother they had just sent to the kitchen to fetch it. A wave of dizziness hit me. The sounds of the kitchen warped and stretched. For a moment, the stainless steel counters faded away. The bright LED lights dimmed into a sickly yellow hum. I was not standing in the kitchen of the Obsidian in 2024. I was back there, 30 years ago, in this very same kitchen, but it was different then. Darker, dirtier. I closed my eyes and the memory washed over me, visceral and raw. It was 1994. I was 22 years old. I had Marcus strapped to my chest in a baby carrier made of old bed sheets because I could not afford a babysitter. The kitchen manager, a cruel man named Mr. Russo, let me work the graveyard shift on the condition that the baby did not make a sound. If he cries, you are out, Russo had told me. I could feel the phantom pain in my lower back. I could feel the scalding hot water of the dish pit eating away at my skin. Back then, we did not have the industrial sanitizers we have today. We scrubbed until our hands were raw and bleeding. I remembered the smell of wet garbage and bleach. I remembered the hunger. God, the hunger. I had not eaten in 2 days because I spent my last $5 on formula for Marcus. I remembered standing over a plate that a waiter had just brought back. It was a half-eaten filet mignon. The customer had left it because it was too pink. I stared at that piece of meat. My stomach cramped so hard I nearly doubled over. I looked around to make sure no one was watching. With trembling hands, I reached into the garbage bin where the waiter had scraped the plate. I grabbed a piece of bread that had touched the meat. It was cold and soggy with gravy. I shoved it into my mouth, swallowing it whole without chewing, praying Mr. Russo did not see me. I looked down at Marcus sleeping against my chest. His tiny face was peaceful. He did not know his mother was eating garbage. He did not know we were sleeping in a shelter. I whispered a promise to him that night over the roar of the dishwashing machine. I promised him that he would never know this hunger. I promised him that one day we would own this building. I promised him that he would eat the steak, not the scraps. I opened my eyes. The flashback receded, but the rage remained. It was a cold, hard knot in the center of my chest. I had kept that promise. I had worked 20-hour days. I had educated myself. I had saved. I had invested. I had bought this hotel. I had given Marcus the life of a prince. And this was how he repaid me. By letting these vultures pick his bones clean while treating the woman who saved him like she was beneath them. I looked at the receipt in my hand again. It was no longer just a bill. It was an insult. It was a desecration of every sacrifice I had ever made. They were laughing at my struggle. They were spitting on the memory of that hungry 22-year-old girl who ate trash so her son could have milk. Clarissa Vance thought she was eating luxury tonight. She thought she was tasting power. But she was wrong. She was eating my sweat. She was drinking my tears. And she was going to choke on them. I looked up at Henri. He was watching me with concern. He had seen the look on my face. He had been with me for 10 years. He knew that look. It was the look I had right before I acquired a competitor. It was the look of a predator deciding how to kill its prey. Henri the First said. My voice was calm again, terrifyingly calm. Keep cooking. Henri blinked. Madame, you want us to continue service? Yes, I replied. I smoothed the receipt on the metal counter. Give them everything they ordered. Give them the caviar. Give them the wagyu. Open the 1982 Petrus. I want them to be full. I want them to be drunk. I want them to feel safe. I picked up a sharp paring knife from the counter. I turned it over in my hand, watching the light glint off the blade. Because when I pull the rug out from under them, I want them to be heavy with their own greed. I want the fall to hurt. Henri nodded slowly. A small, knowing smile crept onto his face. He understood. He turned to his brigade. You heard the boss, he shouted, clapping his hands. Fire the main course for table 4. Make it perfect. It will be their last meal. I turned away from the pass. I walked over to the garbage bin, the same spot where I used to stand 30 years ago. I looked at the scraps of food being thrown away. I took the apron off. I untied the knot at my waist and let the white fabric fall into the trash. I was done playing the servant. The nostalgia was over. The pity was gone. I smoothed down my black silk suit. I checked my reflection in the polished steel of the refrigerator door. The woman staring back at me was not a dishwasher. She was not a mother. She was a CEO, and she was about to conduct a layoff. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed my personal banker. It was late, but he answered on the first ring. Robert, I said, walking toward the service elevator. I need you to freeze all supplementary cards on the Dubois Family Trust, specifically the one issued to Marcus. There was a pause on the other end. Effective immediately, Genevieve Robert asked. Effective immediately, I said. Decline everything. If he tries to buy a stick of gum, I want it to be rejected. I hung up the phone. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the penthouse level. I needed to get my laptop. I needed to get the paperwork. And I needed to change my shoes. Because I was done walking softly. It was time to stomp. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, finally cutting off the chaotic noise of the kitchen and the suffocating atmosphere of the ballroom. Silence washed over me like cool water. I was in the main ladies' restroom on the mezzanine level. This was not just a bathroom. It was a sanctuary I had designed myself during the renovation. The walls were lined with Italian marble the color of heavy cream. The lighting was soft and flattering, emanating from hand-blown glass sconces. The air smelled of fresh lavender and expensive linen. It was a place of dignity, a place where a woman could compose herself. I walked over to the row of sinks, gripping the cold porcelain edge. I looked at myself in the massive gold-framed mirror. The woman staring back at me looked tired. The lines around my eyes seemed deeper than they had this morning. Wearing this uniform, this disguise of servitude, was draining me in ways I had not anticipated. It was not just the physical act of serving. It was the spiritual weight of being unseen, of being erased in my own house. I reached for the gold faucet, turning the handle. I splashed cold water on my wrists, trying to lower my heart rate. I needed to cool down. I needed to stop my hands from shaking before I went back out there to face my son and his vultures. I took a deep breath, counting to 10, reminding myself of the endgame. Reminding myself that patience is the most dangerous weapon in a CEO's arsenal. Suddenly the door swung open. It happened aggressively, banging against the wall stop. The sound of high heels clicking sharply against the marble floor echoed through the room. It was a fast, entitled rhythm. I knew that walk. Panic flared in my chest for a split second. Not fear of them, but fear of being discovered before I was ready. I did not want a confrontation here. Not yet. I wanted the stage. I wanted the spotlight. I moved quickly. I stepped into the last stall, the spacious one designed for accessibility, and quietly slid the lock into place. I did not sit down. I stood perfectly still, pressing my back against the cool partition, holding my breath. 2 women walked in. Their voices were loud, shattering the peaceful ambiance of the room. God, my feet are killing me, a voice complained. It was Tiffany. I could hear the rustle of fabric as she lightly adjusted her dress. I need to sit down for a second. You are doing great, Tiff, another voice said. It was Brittany, her maid of honor and partner in crime. She was a girl who smiled too much and always looked at people like she was calculating their net worth. Just keep it up for another 2 hours. Once the ring is on your finger and the papers are signed, you can relax. I heard the sound of a purse being dropped onto the vanity counter. I know, Tiffany sighed. But did you see his face when Brad started talking about the loan? Marcus looked like he was going to vomit. He is so soft. I honestly do not know how I'm going to deal with him long term. He is like a puppy, a rich, dumb, needy puppy. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. Hearing her speak about my son with such disdain made my blood boil. But I forced myself to stay silent. I needed to hear more. He loves you, though. Brittany laughed. It was a cruel sound. He is obsessed with you. And the baby. There was a pause, a silence that felt heavy and pregnant with secrets. Yeah, well, Tiffany snorted. That is the only reason he proposed so fast. If I hadn't told him the stick turned pink, he would have dragged his feet for another year. He wants to be a daddy so bad it is pathetic. My heart stopped. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Wait, Brittany whispered, her voice dropping but still audible in the echoing room. You mean? Tiffany laughed again, louder this time. Oh, come on, Britt. You know me. I am not pregnant. I am just bloated from all the sushi we ate last week. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. The shock was physical. It felt like someone had punched me in the throat. There was no baby. There was no grandchild. It was a lie. A calculated, monstrous lie designed to trap my son into a marriage he clearly was not ready for. You are evil. Brittany giggled, sounding impressed. What are you going to do when he finds out? I will just have a miscarriage in a few weeks, Tiffany said casually, as if she were talking about returning a pair of shoes. I will cry. He will cry. It will bring us closer together. And by then, the marriage license will be filed, and the prenup Brad wrote will be active. I will have access to the accounts. I closed my eyes. Tears pricked at the corners, hot and angry. This was not just gold digging. This was emotional abuse. She was planning to break my son's heart with a fake tragedy just to secure a payout. I reached into my pocket. My fingers found my phone. I moved with the slow, deliberate precision of a bomb disposal expert. I slid the phone out, being careful not to let the fabric of my apron rustle. I tapped the screen. I opened the voice memo app. My thumb hovered over the red record button. I pressed it. The timer started counting. 1 second, 2 seconds. What about the mom? Brittany asked. I heard the sound of lipstick being applied. You know, the one he never talks about. Is she going to be a problem? Tiffany scoffed. The sound was dismissive and filled with venom. Please. Marcus said she was some kind of cleaner or something. He is ashamed of her. He told me she is probably dead or living in a trailer park somewhere in the South Side. I stared at the phone screen, watching the red waveforms spike with her words. Good, Tiffany continued. Because I do not do mother-in-laws, especially not ghetto ones. If she is alive, she better stay away. I do not want some old poor woman coming around asking for handouts once we are rich. This money is for us, for the Vance legacy, not for charity cases. I bit my lips so hard I tasted copper. She called me a charity case. The woman who owned the building she was standing in. The woman whose bank account could buy her entire family tree. I had heard enough. I had the confession. I had the fraud. I had the disrespect. I had everything I needed to bury them. I stopped the recording. I saved the file. I named it simply Evidence 1. Let's go, Tiffany said. I need to get back out there before Marcus starts hyperventilating. I need to make sure he signs that contract before dessert. I heard them gather their things. I heard the click-clack of their heels moving toward the door. You look hot, babe, Brittany said. I know, Tiffany replied. I look like $1,000,000, which is exactly what I am about to be worth. The door opened and closed. The silence returned. I stood in the stall for a long moment. I looked at the phone in my hand. It felt heavy. It was no longer just a communication device. It was a weapon. I unlocked the stall door and stepped out. I walked back to the mirror. The woman staring back at me was different now. The sadness was gone. The hesitation was gone. The mother who wanted to be liked was dead. In her place stood the executioner. I smoothed my hair. I adjusted my collar. I looked at my reflection and spoke to the empty room. You are not worth $1,000,000, Tiffany. You are not even worth the water I just used to wash my hands. I put the phone back in my pocket. I did not just have a plan anymore. I had a mandate. I was going to go back out there. I was going to serve them their dinner. And then I was going to serve them justice. I walked to the door. I placed my hand on the handle. Game over. I walked back into the ballroom. The atmosphere had shifted. The lights seemed dimmer, the shadows longer. I adjusted the collar of my uniform, feeling the cold weight of the phone in my pocket. It was no longer just a communication device, it was a smoking gun. But I needed more. I needed to know the mechanism of the crime. Tiffany's confession in the bathroom was the motive, but I needed to see the weapon. I scanned the room. The Vance table was a flurry of activity. Clarissa was holding court with a group of sycophants laughing too loudly at her own jokes. Tiffany was applying fresh lip gloss, checking her reflection in the blade of a butter knife. But 2 chairs were empty. Brad and Marcus were gone. My instincts screamed. I looked toward the periphery of the room. There, in a dimly lit alcove near the emergency exit, I saw them. Brad had his arm around Marcus's shoulders, a gesture that looked paternal to the untrained eye, but felt predatory to mine. He was corralling him, boxing him in. I grabbed a fresh bottle of sparkling water from a passing busboy. I need to service that area, I muttered, not waiting for a response. I moved silently across the plush carpet, my steps practiced and light. I was a ghost in my own machine. I approached a decorative pillar just a few feet away from them, partially obscured by a large fern. I pretended to arrange the napkins on a service station, straining my ears to catch their voices over the hum of the jazz band. Listen to me, kid, Brad was saying, his voice low and urgent. He held a thick stack of documents in one hand, tapping them against his other palm for emphasis. This is standard procedure for families like ours. We protect our assets. But to do that, we need liquidity. Marcus looked at the papers, sweat beading on his forehead. But Brad, this looks like a loan application. A secured loan. It is leverage, Marcus. Leverage. Brad corrected him, his tone condescendingly patient. Vance Holdings is about to close a massive deal in Tokyo. We are talking 8 figures. But our capital is tied up in escrow until next month. We just need a bridge. A small infusion of cash to keep the regulators happy until the wire hits. He shoved the papers into Marcus's chest. We need you to co-sign on this credit facility. It is just a formality. The company pays it back in 30 days. You will not pay a dime. In fact, we will give you a finder's fee. 5%. That is a nice chunk of change for a wedding present, right? Marcus flipped through the pages. I watched his hands tremble. He stopped at a page near the back. Collateral, he read aloud, his voice shaking. Property located at 445 Hawthorne Avenue. Brad, that is the house. That is my house. My breath hitched. 445 Hawthorne Avenue. A historic brownstone in the Gold Coast district. I bought that house for Marcus when he graduated from college. I paid cash. It was worth $3 million then. It is worth 5 now. It was his safety net. His sanctuary. And Brad wanted to mortgage it to cover his tracks. It is just paper, Marcus, Brad hissed, stepping closer. His charm was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard pressure. We are not taking the house. We just need to show the bank we have assets. It is a show of good faith. Unless you do not trust us. Marcus swallowed hard. It is not that. It is just the deed. It is in my name, but my mother. She bought it. She always said. Brad cut him off. A harsh, barking laugh erupted from his throat. Your mother. The maid. The woman who scrubs toilets for a living, bought you a $3 million brownstone. Don't make me laugh, kid. Marcus looked down, shame burning his ears. She saved up. She worked hard. Yeah, I bet she did. Brad sneered, his voice dripping with innuendo. Look, it doesn't matter where the money came from. The point is, the house is in your name. You are the man of the house, aren't you? Or does mommy still control your purse strings from the grave? I gripped the water bottle so hard the plastic crinkled. The disrespect was one thing, the gaslighting was another. But the theft, that was a declaration of war. Brad knew exactly what he was doing. He knew the Vances were drowning. He was looking for a life raft, and he decided to use my son's home as the wood to build it. If Marcus signed those papers, the bank would foreclose on the house within months, when Vance Holdings inevitably defaulted. My son would be homeless, and his credit would be destroyed forever. I cannot do it, Brad Marcus said, trying to hand the papers back. I promised her I would never leverage the property. It was her one rule. Brad did not take the papers. Instead, he grabbed Marcus's wrist. The grip was tight, aggressive. You listen to me, you little ungrateful punk, Brad growled. His face was inches from Marcus's. Tiffany is pregnant. She is carrying the heir to the Vance dynasty. Do you want her to stress out? Do you want to tell her that her husband is too scared to make a business deal to secure their future? Marcus froze. The baby card. The lie Tiffany had planted was now being used as a bludgeon. I love Tiffany, Marcus stammered. Then prove it, Brad shouted, though he kept his voice to a harsh whisper. Prove you are worthy of her. Prove you are a Vance. If you walk away from this, if you embarrass me and Clarissa, the wedding is off. We will take Tiffany to Europe. She will raise that baby alone. And you will be back in the gutter where you belong. Is that what you want? Marcus looked terrified. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck driven by a madman. He looked at the pen Brad was holding out. It was a Mont Blanc. I recognized it. I gave that pen to Marcus for his 21st birthday. Brad had stolen it from Marcus's pocket to make him sign his own death warrant. Give me the pen, Marcus whispered. No. The words screamed in my head, but my lips stayed sealed. Not yet. If I stopped him now, they would just spin another lie. They would say I was crazy. They would say I was jealous. I needed the signature. I needed the intent. I needed the crime to be attempted so I could prosecute it. I watched in horror and fascination as Marcus took the pen. He uncapped it. He placed the document against the wall. Just sign right there, Brad cooed, his voice suddenly sickly sweet again. Right on the dotted line. Welcome to the big leagues, son. Marcus hesitated one last time. He looked up, his eyes searching the room as if looking for a savior. He looked right past the fern, right past me. He did not see his mother. He only saw the trap. He lowered the pen. The tip touched the paper. I turned away. I could not watch the ink hit the page. It was too painful. My son was not just signing away a house. He was signing away his soul. He was trading his integrity for the approval of a thief. I walked back toward the main table, my mind racing. I had underestimated them. I thought they were just greedy. I thought they were just snobs. But they were predators. Vicious, calculating predators who would eat their own young if it meant staying in power for one more day. Brad was running a Ponzi scheme. I recognized the structure immediately. He was using new money, my son's assets, to pay off old debts. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, and Peter was my boy. I reached the service station near the main table. I set the water bottle down. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. Cold, hard logic had taken over. I needed to see the document. I needed to know the name of the bank they were using. If it was one of the major lenders, I could stop it with a phone call. I sat on the board of 3 of them. I looked back at the alcove. Brad was clapping Marcus on the shoulder. He took the papers, folded them quickly, and shoved them into his inside jacket pocket. He looked triumphant. He looked like he had just gotten away with murder. They started walking back toward the table. Brad was beaming. Marcus looked like he was walking to the gallows. I adjusted my apron. I picked up a pitcher of iced water. I was going to get that document. I did not know how yet, but I was going to get it. And when I did, I was going to wrap it around Brad Sterling's neck and squeeze until the truth came out. As they sat down, Clarissa looked up. "Did you boys have a nice chat?" she asked, eyeing Brad. Brad patted his pocket. "The best, Clarissa. The best. We are all set for Tokyo." Clarissa smiled, a shark showing its teeth. "Wonderful," she purred. "Now where is that waitress? My glass is empty, and this celebration is just beginning." I stepped out of the shadows. "Right here, ma'am," I said. I moved toward the table. I was not just a waitress anymore. I was a witness. I was the judge. And the jury was about to be sequestered. Brad looked at me high on his victory. He didn't see the danger. He didn't see the storm clouds gathering in my eyes. He just saw a uniform. "Fill it up, sweetheart," he said, tapping his glass. "And keep 'em coming. We have a lot to celebrate." I poured the water. I watched the bubbles rise to the surface, just like the truth. You can push it down, you can try to cap it, but eventually the pressure builds. And when it explodes, it makes a mess of everything. I looked at Marcus. He wouldn't meet my gaze. He was staring at the tablecloth, twisting the ring on his finger. He knew he had done something wrong. He could feel it. But he was too weak to fix it. That was fine. I wasn't weak. I had enough strength for both of us. I finished pouring. I stepped back. "Is there anything else, sir?" I asked Brad. He waved me away without looking. "No. Just stay out of the way until we need you." I retreated to my station. I pulled out my phone again. I sent a text to my legal team. "Draft a forensic accounting motion and get a restraining order ready for a Mr. Brad Sterling. I want his assets frozen by morning." I hit send. The financial trap was set. But Brad didn't realize he wasn't the hunter. He was the bait. And the trap wasn't for my son, it was for him. I waited for the next course. The soup, hot, scalding, and impossible to eat quickly. It would give me time to prepare the final blow, time to turn this dinner party into a deposition. The game had changed. It wasn't about acceptance anymore, it was about survival. And I had never lost a fight for survival in my life. I stood by the service station watching them finish their main course. The Wagyu beef, which cost more than most people's monthly rent, sat half-eaten on Clarissa's plate. She had complained it was too fatty. The irony was suffocating. I adjusted my cuffs, feeling the silk of my suit beneath the cotton of the apron. My patience was not just thinning, it was disintegrating. I had the evidence. I had the motive. I had the weapon. Now all I needed was the trigger. Clarissa provided it. She snapped her fingers. The sound was sharp like a dry twig breaking in a dead forest. It cut through the ambient jazz and the low murmur of conversation. She did not look at me. She simply held her hand in the air, expecting me to materialize. "You, girl. Come here," she commanded. I walked over. I did not rush. I moved with the deliberate pace of a predator closing in on wounded prey. I stopped at the edge of the table. "Yes, ma'am," I said. Clarissa pointed to a large orange Hermes Birkin bag sitting on the floor next to her chair. It was fake. I could tell by the stitching and the hardware, but she treated it like the Holy Grail. "Take this to the valet stand," she said, not bothering to make eye contact. "It is taking up too much room, and I do not want the waiters tripping over it and ruining the leather with their clumsiness. Tell them to put it in the trunk of the Bentley, and make sure they lock it." I looked at the bag. Then I looked at her. She wanted me to carry her counterfeit luxury like a pack mule. I reached down to pick it up. As I did, Clarissa reached into her clutch. She pulled out a single crumpled $5 bill. She held it out, dangling it between her thumb and forefinger like a treat for a dog. "Here," she said. "For your trouble." I extended my hand to take it, but just as my fingers brushed the paper, she let go. She did not drop it into my hand. She dropped it onto the floor. The bill fluttered down, landing right next to my shoe. It sat there on the carpet, a green symbol of total, absolute disrespect. Oops, Clarissa giggled. Her face was flushed with wine and malice. She looked at Tiffany, then at Brad. They were all grinning, waiting. They wanted to see the maid bend down. They wanted to see me scramble for their scraps. Don't spend it all in one place, honey, Clarissa sneered. Buy yourself something nice, like some manners. Time stopped. The room went silent. Even the jazz band seemed to fade into the background. I looked at the money. Then I looked at Marcus. He was staring at the bill on the floor. His face was pale. He knew. He knew that his mother, the woman who had taught him to walk, to read, to drive, was being treated like dirt. He looked up at me. His eyes were pleading. Please, Mom. Just pick it up. Just end this. But I was done. The dam had broken. The reservoir of patience I had built up over 52 years had run dry. I did not bend. I did not kneel. I straightened my spine until I was standing at my full height. I looked down at Clarissa. For the first time all night, I let the mask drop completely. I let the steel show. I let the CEO out. I am not picking that up, I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a gavel striking a desk. Clarissa blinked. Her smile faltered. Excuse me. I looked her dead in the eye. The air around us seemed to drop 10 degrees. I said, I am not picking that up, and I am not taking your bag to the car. Clarissa's mouth fell open. She looked around the table, incredulous. Did you hear that? Did you hear this insolence? She turned back to me, her face twisting into a mask of ugly rage. Pick it up, she hissed. Pick it up right now, or I will have you thrown out on the street. Do you know who we are? We are the Vances. We own this town. And you are nothing. You are a nobody. I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. A single note of amusement. You own nothing, Clarissa, I said. I took a step closer. I looked down at the $5 bill, then back at her. You keep that money, Clarissa. You pick it up, because you are going to need it. Clarissa stared at me, confused. What are you talking about? I leaned in, lowering my voice to a whisper that sounded like a curse. You are going to need it for the bus fare home. The color drained from her face. Brad dropped his fork. It clattered against his china plate, a jarring noise in the sudden silence. Tiffany gasped. What did you say to me? Clarissa shrieked. Her voice cracked high and hysterical. She stood up, knocking her chair back. It fell over with a crash. I stood my ground. I did not flinch. You heard me, I said calmly. Clarissa was trembling. She was shaking with the fury of a woman who had never been told no in her life. She pointed a shaking finger at my face. Manager, she screamed. Her voice echoed through the entire ballroom. Heads turned at every table. The music stopped. Manager, get over here now. She turned to me, her eyes bulging. You are finished. Do you hear me? You are done. I am going to have you fired. I am going to make sure you never work in this city again. I will ruin you. I smiled. It was a genuine smile. A smile of pure, unadulterated relief. The trap was sprung. The enemy had engaged. I looked over her shoulder. I saw Mr. Henderson, the general manager, sprinting across the room. He looked terrified. He saw the overturned chair. He saw the screaming woman. And he saw me standing there, calm as the eye of a storm. Clarissa grabbed Mr. Henderson by the lapels of his suit as soon as he arrived. Fire her, she screamed, spitting in his face. Fire this incompetent, rude, nasty woman right now. She insulted me. She refused to serve me. Get her out of my sight. Mr. Henderson looked at Clarissa. Then he looked at me. His eyes were wide with panic. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. I looked at Clarissa one last time. Go ahead, Clarissa, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. Ask him to fire me. I turned to Mr. Henderson. I nodded my head slightly. Call the manager, Clarissa. I want to see him too. In fact, I have been waiting all night to have a word with management about the quality of the clientele. The room was deathly quiet. Everyone was watching. Marcus was burying his face in his hands. Mr. Henderson gently removed Clarissa's hands from his suit. He stepped back. He straightened his tie. He took a deep breath. "I am sorry, ma'am," Mr. Henderson said, his voice trembling slightly but clear. "I cannot fire this woman." Clarissa's eyes bugged out. "Why not?" "Are you deaf?" I demanded it. Because Mr. Henderson said, gesturing toward me with a shaking hand, "This woman is Genevieve Dubois. She is the owner of this hotel. She is the chairwoman of the board, and she is my boss." Clarissa froze. Brad froze. Tiffany froze. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hanging at the top of its arc right before it drops. I stepped forward. I reached down and picked up the $5 bill. I smoothed it out. I tucked it into Clarissa's cleavage. Like I said, I whispered, "Save it for the bus." Then I turned to Mr. Henderson. "Bring me the files," I said. "Let's finish this." Mr. Henderson stopped in front of me, breathing heavily. He was a man who prided himself on punctuality and protocol, and the sight of his employer being berated in the middle of the dining room had clearly terrified him. He ignored Clarissa completely. He did not even look at her. He turned his body toward me, feet together, hands clasped behind his back, and bowed. It was a deep, respectful bow, the kind usually reserved for royalty or heads of state. "Madame Chairwoman," he said, his voice projecting clearly across the silent room, "I am deeply, profoundly sorry for the delay. I was handling a security issue in the East Wing. Had I known you were personally inspecting the floor service tonight, I would have been at your side immediately. Please accept my resignation if this negligence has caused you any distress." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. You could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. Clarissa's mouth fell open. Her hand, which had been pointing at me, dropped to her side like a dead weight. She blinked rapidly, her brain struggling to process the information. The cognitive dissonance was almost visible on her face. She looked at Mr. Henderson, then at me, then back at Henderson. Chairwoman Clarissa sputtered, her voice weak and trembling. "What are you talking about? You are mistaken. This is the help. She is a server. Look at her shoes. She is wearing sensible shoes." Mr. Henderson straightened up. His face was cold, his expression severe. He looked at Clarissa with the disdain one might show a cockroach on a wedding cake. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his tone icy, "you are speaking to Genevieve Dubois. She is the founder and CEO of Dubois Hospitality. She owns this hotel. She owns the land it sits on, and effectively, she is your host for the evening. If she is wearing sensible shoes, it is because she walks on floors she paid for with cash." Brad let out a laugh. It was a jerky, nervous sound, like a car engine failing to start. He shook his head, smiling desperately. Okay. Good one. Very funny. Is this some kind of performance art? Did Marcus put you up to this? Hiring an actor to play his mom to make her look important?" He refused to believe it. He clung to his delusion because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. If I was who Henderson said I was, then Brad was not the predator. He was the prey. "It is a mistake," Clarissa whispered, grabbing Marcus's arm. "Tell them it is a mistake, Marcus. Tell them who she really is." Marcus did not speak. He sat there staring at the tablecloth. He looked small. He looked defeated. And for the first time that night, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of the Vances, fear of me. I did not answer them. I did not give them the satisfaction of a retort. I had dropped the bomb. Now I would let the radiation sickness set in. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice calm and authoritative, "ensure the guests at table 4 have everything they need. Top off their wine. I want them comfortable. I will be in my office. I have some final paperwork to review regarding the Vance account before I return for the toast." "Yes, Madam," Henderson said, snapping to attention. I turned and walked away. I did not walk toward the kitchen this time. I walked toward the private elevators located behind the velvet ropes in the VIP section. I swiped my keycard. The doors slid open with a soft chime. As I turned to face the room one last time, I saw Clarissa collapsing into her chair, fanning herself frantically with a napkin. Brad was furiously typing on his phone, sweat glistening on his forehead. The elevator whisked me up to the penthouse level. The ride was smooth and silent. I watched the numbers climb. Floor 10, floor 20, floor 40. With every floor I shed a layer of the servant persona. My posture straightened, my jaw set. The fatigue vanished, replaced by the adrenaline of the hunt. The doors opened directly into my sanctuary, the war room. It was a stark contrast to the noise and humidity of the ballroom downstairs. Here the air was cool, crisp, and filtered. The room smelled of mahogany leather and old money. The entire north wall was glass, offering a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, a glittering grid of power and ambition. This was where I made my deals. This was where I crushed my competitors. I walked to my desk. It was a massive slab of black marble, cold and imposing. I sat down in my leather chair. It molded to my back, familiar and comforting. I reached down and unbuttoned the cuffs of my jacket. I took a deep breath, letting the silence center me. Then I turned my chair to face the wall safe, hidden behind an original Basquiat painting. I punched in the code, 1994. The year Marcus was born. The year I decided I would never be poor again. The year I promised myself that no one would ever look down on us. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside, sitting on top of stacks of bonds and deeds, was a single manila envelope. It was thick. It was marked, Confidential Vance Inquiry. I took it out. I placed it on the desk. The sound of the heavy paper hitting the marble was satisfying. Thud, like the sound of a coffin lid closing. I poured myself a glass of cognac from the crystal decanter on the sideboard. I took a sip. The amber liquid burned pleasantly on its way down, sharpening my senses. I opened the file. My private investigator, a former FBI agent named Kowalski, was worth every penny of his exorbitant retainer. He did not just find dirt, he excavated the entire landfill. The first document was a certified copy of a federal arrest warrant. Brad Sterling. He was not just a bad CFO, he was a fugitive. Securities fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement. He had been running a shell company in Delaware, siphoning money from Vance Holdings into his own offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands for the past 3 years. He had bled the family company dry. I ran my finger over the numbers. He had stolen over $4 million. The loan he was trying to force Marcus to sign for. That was not to save the company. That was his exit strategy. He was planning to take the cash and vanish, leaving Clarissa and Tiffany with nothing but massive debt and a foreclosure notice. He was going to burn them to the ground. I turned the page, and then I smiled. It was a cold, humorless smile, a smile that would have terrified my enemies, because Kowalski had found something else, something personal, something that would destroy Clarissa more than the poverty ever could. Photos. Grainy but clear enough to identify the subjects. Brad Sterling entering a Motel 6 on the outskirts of town. And 20 minutes later, a woman entering the same room. She was wearing a trench coat and sunglasses, but I recognized her. It was Sarah, Clarissa's younger sister. The one who was currently sitting downstairs at table 4, holding Clarissa's hand and crying fake tears of joy over the engagement. I flipped through the text logs Kowalski had intercepted. Brad, just get the kid to sign. Once the funds clear, we leave. Paris, just you and me. Sarah. What about Clarissa? Brad. She can rot with the rest of them. She is too stupid to notice we are gone. She is too busy playing aristocrat to realize she is the court jester. I closed the file. I ran my hand over the cover. This was not just leverage. This was a nuclear warhead. Brad was stealing from the company. He was stealing from my son. And he was sleeping with his sister-in-law while plotting to abandon his wife. And Clarissa, the woman who called me a mule, the woman who mocked my hands, she was being played for a fool by everyone around her. Her husband was dead broke, her brother-in-law was a crook, her sister was a traitor, and her daughter was a liar who was faking a pregnancy to trap a rich kid. They were a nest of vipers, and they had made the fatal mistake of trying to bite a dragon. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9 p.m. The toasts were scheduled to begin in 10 minutes. I picked up the file. It felt heavy in my hand. It was the weight of justice. I picked up my glass and finished the cognac in one swallow. "You wanted a show, Clarissa," I whispered to the empty room. "You wanted class. You wanted high society. You wanted to teach my son a lesson about heritage and bloodlines." I stood up. I checked my reflection in the glass of the window. The black suit was sharp. My hair was perfect. My eyes were clear and dangerous. "I am going to give you a lesson you will never forget. I am going to teach you the difference between net worth and self-worth." I walked back to the elevator. The weapon was loaded, the safety was off, and I had an itchy trigger finger. The elevator doors opened and I stepped in. As I descended back toward the ballroom, I did not feel like a mother anymore. I felt like Karma, and Karma was about to make a very public entrance. I picked up the desk phone and dialed the extension for the maitre d'. "Send Marcus Dubois to the penthouse," I said. "Alone. Tell him it is a security matter regarding his fiancée." I hung up. I did not want him to come up here as a son visiting his mother. I wanted him to come up here as a man facing the consequences of his choices. I spun my chair around to face the door. I waited. 5 minutes later, the elevator chimed. The doors slid open. Marcus walked in. He looked disheveled. His tie was crooked and his face was pale. He took 2 steps into the room and stopped dead. He looked at the room, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the Basquiat painting, the shelves lined with awards. And finally he looked at me, sitting behind the massive black marble desk, not in an apron, but in my chair. The throne he had never seen me sit in because I had always tried to shield him from the weight of the crown. "Mom," he whispered, What is this place?" "This," I said, gesturing to the room, "is the office of the CEO of Dubois Hospitality. This is where I work, Marcus. This is where I built the life you are so desperate to apologize for downstairs." Marcus swallowed hard. He looked like a child caught stealing candy. I didn't know," he stammered. "I thought you just managed the properties. I didn't know you owned the Obsidian. You didn't know because you never asked," I replied, my voice devoid of warmth. "You were too busy trying to impress people who would not spit on you if you were on fire." He flinched. "Mom, please." "Downstairs." I know it looked bad, but I had to. You don't understand. The Vances. They are different. They are old money. I just wanted to fit in. I wanted them to accept me. "Accept you?" I asked, standing up. I walked around the desk. I moved slowly, deliberate in every step. "They do not accept you, Marcus. They are consuming you." I reached for the file on the desk. I picked up the photos Kowalski had taken. I tossed them onto the polished marble surface. They slid across the table and stopped right in front of him. "Look at them." Marcus looked down. He saw the photos of Brad. He saw the photos of Sarah. He looked confused. "I don't understand. That's Brad. And that's Sarah, Clarissa's sister." "Keep looking," I said. He flipped through the stack. Then he stopped. His hands started to shake. The photo showed Tiffany. She was not at a charity gala as she had told him last week. She was at a nightclub, and she was kissing another man. A man who was definitely not Marcus. This must be old Marcus," whispered, his voice trembling. "She told me she was visiting her grandmother that night." "She lied," I said, "just like she lied about the baby." Marcus's head snapped up. "What? There is no baby." "Marcus. No, you are wrong." She showed me the test. She has morning sickness. I pulled out my phone. I played the recording from the bathroom. Tiffany's voice, clear and cruel, filled the silent office. I am just bloated from all the sushi. I will just have a miscarriage in a few weeks. He is like a puppy, a rich, dumb, needy puppy. The color drained from Marcus's face. He looked like he had been shot. He slumped into one of the guest chairs, burying his face in his hands. A sound escaped him, a ragged, painful sob that tore at my heart. She said she loved me, he choked out. She said I was her soulmate. She loves your credit score, Marcus, I snapped. I did not go to him. I did not hug him. He needed to feel this pain. He needed the wound to be clean before it could heal. She loves the house I bought you. She loves the lifestyle I provided. You are just the delivery system. Marcus looked up at me. His eyes were red, filled with tears and shame. I am so sorry, Mom. I am so sorry. I was so stupid. They made me feel small, like I wasn't enough. Brad said, he said we were lucky they even looked at us. I walked over to him then. I grabbed his chin and forced him to look at me. You are a Dubois, I said fiercely. You come from a line of survivors. My mother scrubbed floors so I could go to school. I built an empire from nothing so you could stand tall, and you let these mediocrities make you feel small. I let go of his face. I walked back to my desk. I don't forbid you to love Marcus, but I forbid you to be an idiot. You are selling your soul to the devil, and you are doing it for a discount price. Marcus wiped his eyes. He looked at the photos again. Then he looked at the recording on my phone. His expression changed. The sadness was being replaced by anger. Good. Anger I could work with. What do we do? He asked. His voice was stronger now. I asked, raising an eyebrow. There is no we right now. There is me cleaning up your mess. But if you want to be part of the solution, you need to stop being the victim. I pressed a button on my desk. The door opened. 2 security guards stepped in. Escort Mr. Sterling and the Vance family to the VIP holding area. If they try to leave, I ordered. But don't let them leave. Not yet. I turned back to Marcus. Wipe your face, I commanded. Fix your tie. You look like a defeated little boy. I need a man. Marcus stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He adjusted his tie. He took a deep breath. I am ready, Mom. I looked at him. Really looked at him. He was still the boy I raised. He had just lost his way. Good, I said. I picked up the file. I walked to the door. Follow me. Go back downstairs. Sit at that table. Look them in the eye. And when I take the stage, do not look away. I want you to watch Marcus. I want you to watch how a Dubois takes out the trash. I walked out of the office, my heels clicking rhythmically against the floor. I did not look back to see if he was following. I knew he was, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't following his mother. He was following his leader, and we were marching into war. I stepped into the private dressing room adjacent to my office. The air was still waiting for the transformation. I stripped off the black service uniform. I peeled it away like dead skin, leaving the insults and the servitude in a heap on the floor. I would burn that suit later. I walked to the garment bag hanging on the brass rail. I unzipped it. Inside hung my armor. It was an ivory white power suit by Alexander McQueen, tailored to within a millimeter of perfection. It was sharp, architectural, and blindingly bright. I stepped into the trousers. I buttoned the jacket. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was not a mother. She was not a victim. She was a force of nature. I reached into the safe and pulled out the diamond necklace I had originally bought as a wedding gift for Tiffany. It was a cascade of flawless white stones worth more than the Vance family's entire cumulative existence. I fastened it around my own neck. It felt cold and heavy against my skin. Good. I needed the cold. I walked out of the office and headed for the service elevator. I did not want to make a grand entrance from the lobby. I wanted to emerge from the heart of the building like a virus that had finally bypassed the firewall. The elevator descended rapidly. My heart beat in a slow, steady rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. It was the drumbeat of war. The doors opened onto the side of the ballroom stage. The noise of the party washed over me. Laughter, clinking glasses, the smooth, mindless jazz of the live band. They were celebrating a theft. They were toasting to a lie. I caught the eye of the stage manager, a young man named David, who looked terrified to see me standing there in full battle regalia. I drew a finger across my throat. Cut it. Cut it all. David nodded frantically. He spoke into his headset. Abruptly, the music died. The saxophone cut off mid-note. The piano fell silent. The sudden absence of sound was violent. It sucked the air out of the room. The laughter died down, replaced by confused murmurs. Heads turned toward the stage. I stepped out from the wings. The spotlight operator, trained to follow movement, swung the heavy beam of light onto me. The ivory suit caught the light and flared, making me glow like a supernova in the dim room. I walked to the center of the stage. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor. Click, click, click. Each step was a gavel strike. I reached the microphone stand. I gripped the cold metal. I looked out into the sea of faces. I saw them. Table 4, front and center. Clarissa was freezing with her wineglass halfway to her mouth. Brad was staring, his mouth slightly open, a piece of shrimp falling from his fork. Tiffany looked annoyed, as if the interruption was a personal affront. And Marcus. Marcus was sitting straight up, his eyes locked on mine. He looked terrified, but he was watching. I leaned into the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice boomed through the high-end sound system, crisp and commanding. The room went deathly silent. "My name is Genevieve Dubois." A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. They did not know the name. Why would they? They were guests of the Vances. "I am the founder and CEO of Dubois Hospitality. I own this hotel. I own the building across the street. And I own the ground you are currently sitting on." A gasp went through the room. People began to whisper. I saw Clarissa's eyes widen until they looked like they might pop out of her skull. She recognized the voice. She recognized the posture. But her brain could not reconcile the CEO on stage with the maid she had just abused. "But you might recognize me from earlier this evening," I continued, my voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. "I was the clumsy server who filled your water glasses. I was the woman you ordered to clean your shoes. I was the help you tipped $5 to carry your fake designer bags." Clarissa's hand went limp. The crystal wineglass slipped from her fingers. It hit the edge of the table and shattered. The sound of breaking glass was sharp and brutal in the silence. Red wine splashed across the white tablecloth, looking like a fresh crime scene. She dropped her glass. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, is that the waitress?" someone else asked. I did not pause. I did not give them time to recover. "I apologize for the deception," I said, smiling a smile that did not reach my eyes. But I wanted to ensure that the service at my son's engagement party met my exacting standards. I looked directly at Tiffany. She shrank back in her chair, her face draining of color. "My son, Marcus Dubois." The room turned to look at Marcus. He did not look away from me. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "This party was intended to celebrate a union," I said, pacing slowly across the stage. "A union of families, a union of assets. But as a businesswoman, I believe in due diligence. I believe in reading the fine print before signing the contract. And tonight I found some very interesting fine print." I pulled a small remote control from my pocket. I signaled the audio-visual booth. "I had prepared a slideshow for the happy couple," I said. Behind me, the massive 20-foot LED screen flickered to life. Usually this screen would show childhood photos of the bride and groom. Cute moments, first dates, not tonight. The screen blazed with a high-resolution image of a bank statement. It was redacted in places, but the header was clear. "Vance Holdings." The room gasped. This is the current financial standing of the Vance family empire, I narrated, pointing at the screen. As you can see, the liabilities column is quite impressive. 3 bankruptcies in 5 years. And a current debt load of $4.2 million. Brad jumped up. He knocked his chair over. "Turn it off!" he screamed, his face turning a violent shade of purple. "You cannot do this." "This is illegal security," I barked into the microphone. 2 massive guards stepped out of the shadows and blocked Brad's path to the stage. They crossed their arms. Brad stopped, panting, looking like a trapped rat. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," I commanded. "The presentation is not over." I clicked the remote again. The screen changed. It was a complex flowchart. Arrows moved from Vance corporate accounts to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. "This," I explained, "walking to the edge of the stage, is a forensic accounting of where the company money went. It did not go to investments. It did not go to payroll. It went to an offshore account controlled by one man." I pointed the remote at Brad. "Mr. Brad Sterling." The crowd erupted. People were standing up to get a better look. Phones were out, recording everything. The flash of cameras sparkled like strobe lights. "Liar," Brad shrieked. "She is lying. That is fake." I clicked the remote again. A document appeared on the screen. It was the loan application Marcus had almost signed. "And this," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage, "is the document Mr. Sterling tried to coerce my son into signing tonight, a secured loan against a property I purchased. He attempted to commit mortgage fraud using my son as a proxy to cover his embezzlement before the FBI arrived." Clarissa was shaking her head violently. "No, no. Brad said it was for Tokyo. He said it was a bridge loan." I looked down at Clarissa. "There is no Tokyo, Clarissa. There is only grand larceny, and you are an accessory." Clarissa let out a wail that sounded like a dying animal. She grabbed Brad's arm. "Is it true? Tell me it is not true." Brad shoved her away. "Get off me, you stupid cow." The room gasped again at the violence of his reaction. The mask had fully slipped. The sophisticated businessman was gone. The thug remained. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen went black for a second, then it illuminated with the photos Kowalski had taken. Brad and Sarah entering the motel. And finally, I said, my voice quiet now, intimate. "Just to clarify the family dynamics, this is Mr. Sterling securing his future. Not with his wife, but with his sister-in-law." Sarah, who was sitting next to Clarissa, burst into tears and covered her face with her napkin. Clarissa stared at the screen, then at her sister, then at her husband. Her world, her fake constructed fragile world, disintegrated in real time. I clicked the remote off. The screen went dark. The room was in chaos. People were shouting, guests were leaving. But I was not done. I walked back to the center of the stage. I looked at Tiffany. She was trying to sneak away. She had grabbed her purse and was inching toward the exit. "Going somewhere, Tiffany?" I asked. She froze. "We haven't discussed your contribution to this evening," I said. I pulled out my phone. I held it up to the microphone. "This is a recording from the ladies' room taken 20 minutes ago." I pressed play. The sound of Tiffany's voice boomed through the speakers, amplified 1,000 times. "I am not pregnant. I am just bloated. I will just have a miscarriage. Marcus is a rich, dumb, needy puppy." The audio quality was crystal clear. Every sneering syllable hung in the air. Tiffany turned around. Her face was a mask of pure terror. She looked at Marcus. Marcus stood up. He walked around the table. He stood in front of Tiffany. "Marcus, baby," she pleaded, reaching for his hand. That is AI." She faked it. "You know I love you." Marcus looked at her hand. Then he looked at her face. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out the engagement ring box. It was empty because the ring was on her finger. "Give it back," Marcus said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the noise. "Marcus, please," Tiffany cried, grabbing his lapels. "Think about the baby." "There is no baby, Tiffany," Marcus shouted. He ripped the ring off her finger. It was violent, fueled by a broken heart. He held the ring up. "Get out," Marcus said. Tiffany looked at him. Then she looked at the crowd. Everyone was staring at her with disgust. Her social standing was vaporized. I signaled the security team. "Please escort the Vance family off the premises," I said into the microphone, "and make sure they do not take the silverware." As the guards moved in to grab Brad and steer Clarissa toward the exit, I stood alone on the stage. The ivory suit shone under the spotlight. I felt a strange sense of calm. The vengeance was sweet, yes, but seeing my son stand up, that was the victory. I watched as Brad was handcuffed by the police officers I had waiting in the wings. I watched Clarissa sobbing as she was led away, her fake Birkin bag left forgotten on the floor. I watched Tiffany running for the door, shielding her face from the cameras. I looked at the crowd. "Thank you for coming," I said. "Please enjoy the rest of the evening. The open bar is now closed to the Vance family, but for everyone else, drinks are on the house." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. I turned and walked off the stage. I did not look back. I had a business to run, and I had a son to rebuild. I stood at the edge of the stage, the microphone dangling loosely in my hand, watching the chaos I had orchestrated unfold with the precision of a Swiss watch. The feeling washing over me was indescribable. It was not just happiness, it was not just relief. It was a potent, intoxicating cocktail of vindication and power. It tasted better than the vintage Petrus I had served them earlier. It tasted better than any award I had ever won. It was the taste of total, absolute victory. The room was still buzzing with the shock of the revelation, but I was not done. I raised my hand and the room fell silent again. They were hanging on my every move now. I looked down at Clarissa. She was slumped in her chair, a ruin of a woman in an expensive dress, staring blankly at the shattered wine glass at her feet. "There is one final piece of business to conclude," I said, my voice smooth and resonant. I signaled to Mr. Henderson. He walked onto the stage carrying a thin blue folder. He handed it to me with a bow. I opened it slowly, savoring the sound of the paper crinkling in the microphone. "This morning at 9 a.m. sharp, the board of directors at Dubois Hospitality convened for an emergency meeting," I announced. "We discussed an acquisition opportunity, a distressed asset that was available for pennies on the dollar." I pulled out the document. It was a purchase agreement. "You see, Clarissa, when a company like Vance Holdings defaults on its loans so many times, the debt is often sold to collection agencies or private equity firms. It just so happens that the primary holder of your debt was looking to liquidate." I paused for effect. Clarissa looked up, her eyes filled with a dawning horror. "I bought it, Clarissa. I bought all of it. Every outstanding loan, every mortgage, every lien. As of this morning, Dubois Hospitality is the sole creditor of Vance Holdings." I took a step closer to the edge of the stage, looking directly down at her. "Do you know what that means, Clarissa? It means I own your house, I own your cars, I own the clothes on your back. And most importantly, it means that technically, until the liquidation process is complete, you work for me." The crowd gasped. A few people actually laughed. The irony was too perfect. The woman who had treated me like a slave was now legally my employee. Clarissa began to shake. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You can't do that. That is illegal. You are the devil." "I am not the devil, Clarissa," I replied coldly. "I am the landlord, and I have very strict rules about the conduct of my staff." I pointed to the floor, to the puddle of red wine and the shards of glass she had broken in her shock. "Earlier tonight you dropped a $5 bill on the floor and told me to pick it up. You told me that cleaning up after you was the natural order of things because of my station in life." I gestured to the mess. "Well, the natural order has changed. Mr. Henderson, please bring Mrs. Vance a broom and a dustpan." "No!" Clarissa shrieked, scrambling backward. "I will not. I am a Vance. You are a debtor." "Clarissa," I shouted, my voice cracking like a whip. "And if you want to keep the roof over your head for even one more week before I evict you, you will clean up the mess you made in my hotel." Mr. Henderson placed a broom and a silver dustpan in front of her. The entire room watched. The pressure was immense. Clarissa looked at the broom. She looked at the crowd, seeing their judgment. She looked at me, seeing my resolve. Slowly, painfully, she reached out. Her hand was trembling violently. She grabbed the handle of the broom. She stood up, her legs shaking, and began to sweep the glass. The sight was pathetic. It was tragic. And it was necessary. "That is enough of that," Brad roared. He had been sitting in stunned silence, but seeing his wife humiliated sparked something primal and stupid in him. He jumped up, knocking the security guards aside with a burst of desperate strength. His face was twisted into a mask of pure hatred. He did not care about the debt. He did not care about the fraud. He only wanted to hurt the woman who had stripped him naked in front of the world. "I will kill you!" he screamed, lunging toward the stage. I will kill you!" He scrambled up the stairs, his hands reaching for my throat. The crowd screamed. I did not move. I did not flinch. I did not even blink. Because I knew something Brad did not. I knew that the Chicago Police Department had been standing behind the curtain for the last 10 minutes. Freeze Police 3 officers burst from the wings, weapons drawn. Before Brad could even reach the microphone stand, he was tackled. 2 officers slammed him into the hardwood floor of the stage. The sound of his body hitting the deck was a heavy, dull thud that vibrated through the floorboards. "Get your hands behind your back! Stop resisting!" Brad was screaming obscenities, thrashing like a wild animal. But it was over. I watched calmly as they wrenched his arms back and slapped the handcuffs on his wrists. The metal clicking shut was the sweetest sound I had heard all night. One of the officers, a tall sergeant, stood up and addressed the room, breathless but professional. "Brad Sterling, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. You have the right to remain silent." I walked over to where Brad was pinned to the floor. I looked down at him. His tuxedo was torn. His face was pressed against the wood. He looked up at me with one wild, bloodshot eye. "You planned this." He spat saliva flying from his mouth. "You planned this whole thing." I leaned down, bringing my face close to his, but out of biting range. "I didn't plan your crimes, Brad," I whispered. "I just turned on the lights." They hauled him to his feet. He was dragged off the stage, kicking and screaming, past the very people he had tried to impress just an hour ago. I turned back to the table. 2 down, 1 to go. Tiffany was standing near the exit, frozen. She had watched her father figure get arrested and her mother get turned into a janitor. She looked at Marcus. He was standing by the table watching the police lead Brad away. His face was unreadable. Tiffany ran to him. She moved with the desperation of a drowning woman spotting a piece of driftwood. She grabbed his arm, her long nails digging into his jacket. "Marcus, Marcus, please," she cried, the tears flowing freely now. "You have to help me. I didn't know, I swear to God, I didn't know what my dad was doing. I am a victim too." She tried to bury her face in his chest. She tried to use the same physical manipulation that had worked on him for 2 years. "Marcus, baby, look at me. It is us against the world, remember? We can fix this. My mom is crazy. Brad is crazy, but we love each other." I watched Marcus. This was the final test. If he folded now, if he let her in, everything I had done would be for nothing. Marcus stood still for a second. Then he moved. He did not hug her. He did not comfort her. He took a step back, breaking her grip. He brushed the spot on his sleeve where she had touched him as if wiping away dirt. "Don't touch me," Marcus said. His voice was low, devoid of the warmth she was used to. Tiffany froze. "Marcus. And don't call me baby," he continued, looking her up and down with cold, clinical detachment. "I heard the recording. Tiffany, I heard you call me a dumb puppy. I heard you laugh about the baby that doesn't exist." Tiffany shook her head frantically. No, that was out of context. I was just stressed. I was scared." "You weren't scared," Marcus said, cutting her off. "You were greedy. You saw a meal ticket. You saw a trust fund. You never saw me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I just blocked your number, Tiffany, and I blocked your credit cards. The ride is over. But, but where will I go? Tiffany stammered, looking around the room as the reality of her situation set in. They took my dad. My mom is sweeping the floor. I have nowhere to go. Marcus looked at me. We locked eyes. He gave me a small, sad smile. Then he looked back at Tiffany. I suggest you find a lawyer, Marcus said, and maybe a job. I hear Dubois Hospitality is hiring housekeeping staff, but you will have to start at the bottom, just like my mother did. He turned his back on her. It was a final, irrevocable motion. Tiffany stood there, mouth agape, realizing she had lost everything. The money, the status, the man. She let out a sob and ran for the door, chasing after the police car that held the last of her hopes. I walked to the edge of the stage. The show was over. The villains were vanquished. The hero had found his spine. I looked at Clarissa, who was still holding the broom, weeping silently. You can stop now, Clarissa, I said tiredly. Leave the broom. Security will escort you out. She dropped the broom and fled, a ghost of her former arrogance. The room erupted into applause. It started slow, then built into a roar. They were cheering for the drama, yes, but they were also cheering for justice. I walked down the stairs from the stage. Marcus met me at the bottom. He looked exhausted, but he stood taller than I had ever seen him. Did I do okay? He asked quietly. I reached out and adjusted his bow tie, smoothing the fabric. You did good, Marcus, I said, feeling the sting of tears in my own eyes. You did good. Come on, he said, offering me his arm. Let's go home. I think we have had enough parties for one lifetime. I took his arm. Agreed, I said. As we walked out of the ballroom, leaving the wreckage of the Vance dynasty behind us, I knew one thing for certain. The Obsidian Hotel would need a deep cleaning tomorrow. But tonight the air had never been cleaner. The silence that followed the departure of the Vance family was heavy, but it was a clean silence. It was the sound of a fever breaking. I watched from the balcony as the police cruisers flashed their lights against the dark Chicago pavement, ferrying away the architects of my son's misery. Clarissa Vance did not go quietly. Even from 40 floors up, I could imagine her screeching about her rights, about her lineage, about the injustice of it all. But down there on the street, she was just another woman who had tried to spend money she did not have. The city would swallow her whole. I turned back to the room. The party was effectively over. The guests, realizing that the entertainment had shifted from celebration to criminal investigation, had begun to filter out. But they left with a new respect in their eyes. They nodded to me as they passed, not as peers, but as subjects acknowledging a queen who had just defended her throne. I signaled for the cleaning crew. Within minutes, the ballroom was a hive of activity. The shattered glass was swept away. The spilled wine was scrubbed from the carpet. The physical remnants of the Vances were erased as easily as their financial standing. Marcus was waiting for me by the service elevator. He had taken off his tuxedo jacket and undone his tie. He looked exhausted, drained of the nervous energy that had propelled him through the last few months. He looked older, but for the first time in a long time he looked real. Come on, I said, gesturing to the open doors. Let's go upstairs. We rode to the penthouse in silence. When the doors opened, Marcus walked to the window and looked out at the skyline. He stood there for a long time, watching the city breathe. I poured 2 glasses of water and sat down on the sofa, waiting for him to speak. I'm sorry, doesn't cover it. Does it? He said finally, not turning around. No, I replied. It doesn't. He turned to face me. His eyes were dry now, clear and focused. I want to withdraw from the trust, Mom. I don't want the allowance. I don't want the house on Hawthorne Avenue. Sell it. Put the money back into the company. I took a sip of water, watching him over the rim of the glass. And where will you live? I will find an apartment. A small one. One I can afford on a salary. And what salary is that? I asked. You just quit your job at the startup to work for Vance Holdings, a company that no longer exists. I know, Marcus said. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. I want to work for you. But not as a VP, not as a director. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had hesitated to sign the loan document. You said the dish pit is hiring. I want the job. I want to learn the business the way you did, from the ground up. I want to know what it feels like to earn a paycheck that smells like hard work, not nepotism. I looked at him. I searched his face for any sign of deception, any hint that this was just another performance to get back in my good graces. I saw none. I saw resolve. I saw the spark of the Dubois work ethic that I feared had been extinguished. The shift starts at 6 a.m., I said. Don't be late. And Marcus Henry doesn't care who your mother is. If you break a plate, it comes out of your wages. Marcus smiled. A genuine, tired smile. I wouldn't expect anything less. He finished his water and set the glass down on the coaster. He leaned over and kissed my cheek. Good night, Mom. Thank you for saving me, even when I didn't want to be saved. Good night, Marcus. I watched him leave. I listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway. He had a long road ahead of him. Humility is a painful teacher, but it is the only one that truly matters. He would scrub pots, he would ache, he would be humbled, and he would become a man I could leave this empire to. I sat alone in the vast, quiet luxury of the penthouse. The adrenaline of the confrontation began to ebb, leaving behind a deep, soulful weariness. I picked up my glass of wine, the expensive vintage that Clarissa had spilled, and walked to the window. I looked at my reflection in the glass. The ivory suit was still pristine. The diamonds around my neck still glittered. But I saw the girl from the South Side looking back at me. I saw the struggle. I saw the years of being overlooked, undervalued, and underestimated. Tonight was not just about exposing a fraud. It was about drawing a line in the sand. We teach people how to treat us. For too long, I had allowed my desire for my son's happiness to cloud my judgment. I had allowed the Vances to trample on my dignity because I thought it was the price of admission to their world. I thought if I just made myself small enough, quiet enough, generous enough, they would eventually see my worth. But that is the lie we tell ourselves. We think that if we shrink, we will fit. We think that if we give until we bleed, they will finally appreciate the blood. They won't. Sharks do not thank the water for being wet. They just swim. And parasites do not thank the host. They just feed. I took a slow sip of wine, letting the truth settle in my bones. Never lower your crown to make someone else feel comfortable. I had spent the evening on my knees wiping a shoe, thinking I was keeping the peace, but I was only declaring war on my own self-respect. When you bow your head to appease a dwarf, your crown falls off, and they will not pick it up. They will step on it. They will crush it into the dirt and then blame you for dropping it. Clarissa Vance wanted a servant. She wanted a mule. She got a queen instead, and the weight of that reality crushed her. That is the lesson. That is the legacy. You cannot buy respect. You cannot negotiate for it. You have to command it. You have to walk into every room, whether it is a boardroom or a kitchen, knowing exactly who you are and what you bring to the table. And if they cannot handle the feast, let them starve. I turned away from the window. My eyes caught a glint of light from the hallway table. I walked over to it. There, lying on the polished wood, was the $5 bill. The bill Clarissa had thrown at my feet. The bill that was meant to be my payment for indignity. It was wrinkled. It was dirty. It was worthless in the grand scheme of my wealth. But it was the most valuable thing I earned tonight. I picked it up. I smoothed out the creases with my thumb. Tomorrow I would call my framer. I would have this bill mounted on black velvet behind museum-quality glass. I would have a small brass plaque engraved, and I would hang it in the main lobby of the Obsidian, right behind the front desk, where every employee and every guest would see it. It would not be a trophy of hate. It would be a monument to standards. The plaque would read simply, "The price of disrespect." Do not judge the book by the cover. Do not mistake silence for weakness. And never ever underestimating the woman who signs the checks. I placed the bill back on the table. I finished my wine. I turned off the lights in the war room, plunging the penthouse into darkness, save for the glow of the city below. The Vances were gone. The debt was bought. The sun was returned. I walked toward my bedroom, my head held high, my footsteps echoing in the silence of my victory. My name is Genevieve Dubois. I started with a mop bucket and a dream. Today I own the skyline. And tomorrow, I have a hotel to run. The most valuable asset you possess is not your bank account, but your dignity. Genevieve's story is a powerful reminder that true class is defined by how we treat those who can do nothing for us. When people judge you by your appearance, do not shrink to fit their limited perspective. Stand tall. Real power doesn't need to shout, it simply acts with integrity. Never lower your standards to accommodate someone else's arrogance, because once you drop your crown, they will only trample it. Have you ever been underestimated by someone based on your looks? Share your story in the comments below, and subscribe for more tales of justice served.